Hang on. It's been a while since I've done this. I don't remember how to start videos. Hey everybody, it's me! And that must mean a holiday's coming up because I have decided to crawl myself out of my little hole that I have dug myself into, much like a little bug creature who is hibernating for the years to come. Now, I love Halloween, and last year I decided to make a video about a children's movie that I really loved and adored and I cared so much for, but I think this year I'm going to take the opposite approach and do one of my favorite slasher films ever made. Horror as a genre has been popular for as long as I can remember, but we can really tie its birth in cinema to Night of the Living Dead. From then onwards, we saw horror begin to evolve. Horror is accessible and relatable. Filmmakers knew this. Horror was starting to become art films. Texas Chainsaw Massacre and The Exorcist both worked as commentary on the worlds that we inhabited. Then the 80s hit, and we got films that established the foundations of slasher flicks as we know them. Halloween, Nightmare on Elm Street, Friday the 13th, these films all started franchises that would later kill the very genre that they pioneered, at least until the 90s. Buckle up and get your popcorn. My name's Davey, I love slasher flicks, and this is Scream, Behind the Mask.
I felt you crumble through my fingers just a couple times. The sky was littered with your dust. I felt the murmurs of a people from another time. Is this idolatry or lust? It's not a simple feeling. I'm reeling from the impact still. My world froze. How could shit have been that still? I could die inside this crater with your eye-insided nature while we're taking shit straight. Why should I invite the chaser? What's the basis? I'm floating on a rock.
Scream really feels like a horror flick made for both fans of the genre and casual fans alike. It's a film that can be genuinely scary while also not afraid to critique its predecessors. And I know that I'm really sucking off the film, but I truly believe that Scream is one of my favorite movies to ever hit the big screen. So why and how did it come to be? The first Scream as we know it was adapted from a screenplay written by Kevin Williamson called Scary Movie. Williamson wrote the screenplay after seeing the story of the real Florida serial killer Danny Rolling, aka the Gainesville Ripper. Rolling, for lack of a better word, was a monster. He preyed on college students and would mutilate them. Williamson was genuinely terrified by Rolling, as he reminded him of a real-life Michael Myers. He would later get to writing and set the foundations of what Scream came to be. Scream was a shot in the dark, to say the least. Williamson was struggling to pay the bills and really felt like it was now or never to get that film greenlit before someone else came along. He decided to pitch a film that was not only scary, but could also be funny. The film was meant to be a parody of slasher flicks that came before, and it took heavy inspirations from movies such as Black Christmas, Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street, and Halloween. The last two films being very significant because Halloween played a heavy influence on Scream, and Nightmare on Elm Street's director Wes Craven came on to direct the film, although it did take some convincing.
I think the reason that I passed on it was my usual stupidity. You know, just I have this long career-long ambivalence towards doing genre films, and I don't want to sound like prissy, but there is an element to the genre that is can be said to be misogynistic, for instance. And there's a part of me that feels like, how much longer do you want to do this?
I'm going to touch on that last clip a little later as it's very important. Wes Craven is genuinely one of my favorite directors to ever do it, and his love for horror cinema really shines through in these movies. I think there's a common misconception that Scream being a parody makes it a comedy that doesn't take itself too seriously, and I think that couldn't be further from the case. The franchise has a level of self-awareness in regards to the tropes that present themselves in the slasher genre, and instead of solely trying to criticize those tropes and break them down, the film embraces those tropes in order to subvert expectations. Okay, I put this off for long enough. Cue opening. The beginning of this film scares me to this day, and I think no matter how many times that I've seen it, it is always going to terrify me. Our story opens with Casey Becker, played by Drew Barrymore, alone in her house, and right away we are introduced to our film's main antagonist.
You're forgiven. Bye now.
Wait, don't hang up.
What?
I want to talk to you for a second.
The voice of Ghostface was performed by Roger L. Jackson, and his delivery is perfect. When Casey picks up the phone, the killer is very suave and flirtatious, but once the demeanor drops, the tension shoots up to 11. Like, watch this.
Do you have a boyfriend?
No.
You never told me your name.
Why do you want to know my name?
I want to know who I'm looking at.
What did you say?
Holy fuck, isn't that terrifying? Jackson would actually remain on set during filming, but he would remain hidden from the actors so their interactions could actually feel terrifying due to being organically delivered in real time. It really does sell the scene for me, especially at the part where Ghostface is playing a game of horror trivia with Casey, betting on her life. Once the killer actually breaks into the house, you really can't help but wonder how the hell she's gonna get out of it. And then the rug gets pulled out from under you. What's so amazing about the decision to kill Casey off right away was that Drew was all over the posters. She was the face of the movie. Audiences going in thought that she was going to be the main character, and less than 10 minutes in, she's the second kill of the film. And the coolest part is that was her idea. It's similar to Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, and how Janet Leigh was the face of the promotional material only to be murdered very early on. From the get-go, the film has established that it is going to play with your expectations. You don't know what's coming next. And while still playing into being a parody, it's taking the loss of life and every kill very seriously and playing it out straight. So Drew Barrymore is dead. And as the audience member, you're probably thinking, who is our main lead? Neve Campbell's portrayal of Sidney Prescott is one of my favorite protagonists in film, and everyone needs to pay their respects. I think what makes Final Girls in horror so great is the role that they play in the story. Characters like Laurie Strode and Sidney Prescott have strong conviction and purely survive because of their will to live. The filmmakers knew this going in, because scenes of Halloween with Laurie are shown and directly referenced in the film, showing their influence. What separates the two is that Sidney's story and tie to the killer is very personal. At least if we're looking at the new Halloween's continuity, Laurie in the first film was just a victim by circumstance. We learn that Sidney's mother was murdered and the year anniversary is coming up. The new serial killer has revealed themselves to her, and now she has to deal with both the physical battle of her killer and the mental battle as she's left to deal with the trauma of her mother's death. Sidney, to me, comes off as very strong and very compelling. There's a scene in the bathroom where she's listening to a girl slander her name and speak on her mother. For the entirety of the film, she's constantly being attacked mentally by the people around her, by the killer, and even her own self-doubt that's beginning to grow more and more. It makes her interactions with Ghostface feel way more personable, and because of that, every death in the film is more tragic because it really does feel like everyone's just collateral, leading up to a reveal that really does feel satisfying. So I've already put a spoiler warning, but if you haven't seen the film, go do that and come back. So let's talk about the cast. The supporting cast is amazing. And to me and many others, Courtney Cox's portrayal of Gale Weathers is the highlight of these films. It's so strange seeing Courtney Cox perform such a convincing Gale Weathers, as many people wouldn't have guessed she could be such a bitch. And the filmmakers shared this sentiment. She really had to convince the filmmakers that she was cut out for the role.
I wanted to play the part of Gale Weathers because she was just a total... It was something that I hadn't got to play in a while, at least being on Friends for so long. And I had to really do some persuading to get the part.
And I'm glad she did. She's a reporter who used the story of Sidney's mother's murder for profit and truly believed that Sidney identified the wrong killer. She'll naturally find herself in opposition with Sidney.
So, how's the book? Well, it'll be out later this year. Oh, I'll look for it. I'll send you a copy.
Just like Sidney, she's a strong personality, but lacks the empathy that our main character does. Not to say that she's inherently an evil person, but she doesn't find issue capitalizing on an opportunity, even if it means putting herself in harm's way.
If I'm right about this, I could save a man's life. Do you know what that could do for my book sales?
Her morals are really gray, and that's what makes her so compelling. She plays a hand at stopping the killers and at least has some sort of conscience, but her motives are selfish. I think that's why I like watching her performance with David Arquette so much. The kind-hearted Dewey paired up with someone like Gale who's much less selfless is really compelling, and their interactions are great. At first it feels like Gale is trying to manipulate Dewey to get closer to the main story, but at the end you really do start to feel him win her over. There's so much charm oozing from every scene that he's in, and he really does get a laugh out of me.
Hey, Dewey, can we go now?
Hold on a second.
God damn it, Dewey.
Well, what did Mama tell you? When I wear this badge, you treat me like a man of the law.
I'm sorry, Deputy Dewey boy, but we're ready to go.
He has this desire to be taken seriously by the people around him, and yet his kind nature and almost childish attitude get in the way of that, and yet he doesn't hesitate to help people. His character was so loved during filming that they even added a scene of him being rolled into an ambulance to guarantee he'd come back for a second film. And I think because of that decision, there's this sense of tragedy in retrospect, because he never actually found out that his sister Tatum had died in the iconic garage scene.
No, please don't kill me, Mr. Ghostface. I want to be in the sequel.
I think that scene with Tatum is great because it really does humanize Ghostface in a way. The tragic part about her death, besides the fact that Dewey was ignorant of it, was that had she remained composed and kept her cool, she might have lived or even beat Ghostface. Many of the encounters that Ghostface had showed him messing up and being hurt by those he was attacking, but his encounter with Tatum really showed just how vulnerable the killer is. They're only human, and for a second, she almost had him knocked out, but in the moment, she decided to escape through the dog door. Though not inherently terrible, it did cost her life. It's not for certain, but at the very least, had she fought to go through the door behind Ghostface, she might have survived or even beat him. As goofy as this death sounds on paper, I don't think that you can really blame Tatum for trying, and I think that you can say that about a lot of the deaths in the film. And I think you can really point that to the decision to keep the comedy of the film outside of the death scenes themselves. The comedy is usually saved for the time we have to breathe in between each death scene, but also the build-up to those scenes. And it keeps these characters feeling really human and allows us to connect to them. Like Kenny. He's not a major player in the film by any means, but his kindness really does leave an impact. When we look at the last few moments of his life after Ghostface slits his throat, he points Sidney in a direction to escape. I think for that reason, his death is genuinely sad to watch. I think one aspect that I've yet to touch on about these films that make them so fun is that the characters in the universe have seen the films that preceded it. Like, we've established that Halloween is a movie in the Scream universe, but we get commentary on many other films through the comic relief Randy.
There's a formula to it. A very simple formula. Everybody's a suspect.
Randy is hilarious, and every scene he's in is great. He's definitely one of my favorite characters of the series. And I think what's so funny about him is that the rules that he set out on how to survive a horror film are broken by the survivors.
There are certain rules that one must abide by in order to successfully survive a horror movie. For instance, number 1, you can never have sex. Number 2, you can never drink or do drugs. And number 3, never, ever, ever, under any circumstances, say, "I'll be right back."
Be right back.
I've talked an awful lot about the characters, and I think it's important because the film wouldn't work if we didn't care about the cast. And even though we really don't know anyone's wants or needs, even Sidney, we don't know what she wants or what her goals are, and yet we can relate to them because the film has given us enough time to see who they are personality-wise. Hell, Casey Becker is in the film for less than 10 minutes, and her impact on the genre cannot be overstated. Scream does a lot to call back to its predecessors. Now, I'm not going to spend time going over every little reference to other horror films.
Damn little shits.
What'd you call me? Huh?
Not your friend.
Okay, that one was cute. I think I would rather just take time to explain how the film embraces the genre, like when Sidney gets her first call from Ghostface.
What's your favorite scary movie?
Oh, come on, you know I don't watch that shit.
Why not? Too scared?
No, it's just what's the point? They're all the same. Some stupid killer stalking some big-breasted girl who can't act, who's always running up the stairs when she should be going out the front door. It's insulting.
She actively criticizes the tropes that the slasher films created, only to fall victim to those same mistakes, showing to us as an audience that these are just everyday people. Any sense of level-headedness that our heroes might have can fall apart in an instant given the right circumstances. Even more than that, I think one of my favorite aspects of the film is that each character talks in horror movies. They reference these films to each other not just for our sake as an audience, but also for each other, to draw similarities in their situations and find any sense of rationale. Because if a masked killer was running loose in your neighborhood, I think many people would draw connections to a horror film, even if just a little. And because of that, there is a sense of reality in the film. Each character, including the killers, are just people. They are not indestructible. There's no supernatural events. There's no trained killers. Everyone is on equal ground. In fact, Ghostface only has the upper hand due to the mental barriers that our characters have in that fight or flight moment. In fact, when you look at the mistakes made by Tatum and Sidney, you can really boil down Tatum's death to bad luck and high adrenaline. I think a key part of what keeps that sense of reality in Scream for me is its sense of timing. And it's that sense of timing that really does make Kevin Williamson and Wes Craven some of the greats for me. So here's what I mean. The ways that Ghostface appears and the times that he appears at become more and more justified as the climax goes on. In order to keep up with the idea that Ghostface is just a regular person, the story needs to do two things. Number one, Ghostface must be vulnerable, which we've established in his encounters with both Sidney and Tatum. 2. Ghostface must not be able to move around at speeds incapable of a normal person. If we are to believe that Ghostface must move at the speed of a normal person, the film must give us enough time in between each event. And it does this in a few ways. First, the film establishes just how far everyone is away from the city, meaning the killer must be someone at the party, which is like duh, but at the very least it's telling us that it's somebody in the main cast, and for it to be somebody outside of the main circle would be a cop-out. It also lets us know that for any help to get to the house, it's gonna take a while. We also have Kenny watching the camera that's on a 30-second delay, which allows Kenny's surprise attack to make sense, because Ghostface had enough time to run out of the house while still being on Kenny's monitor. The story beats that play out are also located with enough space from one another that it allows Ghostface to move at a speed that's reasonable. The climax really starts during the scene where Sidney and Billy are in the bedroom. Billy is stabbed and falls to the ground, and Sidney makes her escape through the attic window. This is when she discovers Tatum's body, that hadn't been found at this point due to her being in the back of the house. Sidney makes her way to Kenny's van, and the killer goes downstairs where he sees Randy. He's about to kill Randy, but stops because he hears Sidney outside calling for help. Sidney, while in Kenny's van, watches the camera and sees Ghostface with Randy, but because of the delay, Kenny goes out and is immediately killed. Sidney gets out of the van and makes her way toward a field in the house, and we can assume Ghostface goes back to kill Randy, but at this moment Randy has already left the house. While this is going on, Gale goes to the van while Dewey makes his way to the house alone. Randy is then seen in the van with Gale, where he accidentally scares her into beating him with the phone. Gale decides to drive off in the van, where we last see Randy laying in the road. Sidney happens to be standing in the road, causing Gale to drive off, crashing her van. Sidney makes her way back to the house, only to find Dewey walking out with a knife in his back. Once she's at the doorway, Randy walks up from where we last left him, and Stu follows, coming from the direction of the killer. The sequence of events works due to all the parts needed for it to work. Not only that, in this little sequence, we have been shown every key player except for one, leading us to come to the conclusion that Stu is the killer. And though at this point in the story it's obvious to us now, the movie has allowed us to put the pieces together without blatantly telling us at this point. And yet what makes the mystery so memorable is the rug being pulled out from under us once we've pieced it all together.
Just help me. Whoa, come on. Stu's flipped out. He's gone mad.
We all go a little mad sometimes.
No, Billy!
I think it's really cool to have Billy's reveal happen once the audience has pieced together in our mind that it's Stu, but the movie doesn't give us enough time to question that or call bullshit on the writing, because at that same moment, Stu reveals himself as well.
Surprise, Sidney.
Leading the audience to feel vindicated on the mystery that they've put together. Not only that, the twist works because it allows Ghostface to be able to move at the rate that he does because there's two killers. It makes more sense. And I know that Scream is known for the two killer twist now, but at the time, this was groundbreaking. It allowed each character to move autonomously from each other while not giving themselves away. I've been waiting to talk about the killers because Billy and Stu are genuinely my favorite killers in the franchise. At least them as a duo are.
Yes, mama's boy.
Fuck! Fucking hit me with the phone, Dick! Fucker, where are you?
The reveal doesn't feel cheap to me, and on a second watch, you really start to see the nuances in their performances with one another.
How do you gut someone?
You take a knife and you slit him from groin to sternum.
Hey, it's called tact, you fuck rag.
Oh, Billy, hey.
Like the first scene where Billy and Sidney are just chilling in her room, and he walks over and he turns up the music. He does this to block the sound of Stu breaking in and kidnapping Sidney's dad. That's insane. Skeet Ulrich as Billy is an amazing casting choice. His suave demeanor and his genuine charm is terrifying in retrospect. If we look back at that first scene with Casey, that's definitely him talking to her on the phone. And to be able to flip that on a dime is insane. His interactions with Stu are great. I love every scene that they're in together, especially the ones at the end. Stu is played by Matthew Lillard, and he's amazing in every scene that he's in. He's so over the top. And even if Lillard doesn't agree with the way that he portrayed Stu, I think I'd argue that without that kind of delivery, his character would not be as memorable.
Come on, Sidney. You think about it now, huh? Your daddy's the chief suspect. We cloned his cellular. Evidence is all right there, baby.
And his motive is just so fitting to me.
Oh, Stu. What's your motive? Billy's got one. The police are on their way. What are you gonna tell them?
Peer pressure. I'm far too sensitive. I'm gonna rip you up, you bitch!
I know that I've sung the praises of Wes Craven throughout this whole video, but the reality of it is that it took a huge team to make this movie happen. And the fact that it even came out is a miracle. It definitely wouldn't be possible without the countless people who worked on it, and I wish I could sing everyone their praises individually.
I think the reason that I passed on it was my usual stupidity. Just I have this long career-long ambivalence towards doing genre films, and I don't want to sound like I'm prissy, but there is an element to the genre that is can be said to be misogynistic, for instance. And there's a part of me that feels like, how much longer do you want to do this?
I think what I admire about Wes is how much he cared. I referenced this clip earlier in the video, and I think what's so significant about that quote and why it sticks with me so much is that Wes knew that he was responsible for some of the worst tropes in the genre. The first film that he directed was Last House on the Left, a film that glorified violence in a disgusting way. It was a film that celebrated the abuse of young women. It's a film that genuinely disgusted me and established the tropes that I hate the most. So when Wes said this, it didn't strike me as hypocrisy, but rather it was introspection and atonement. And when I see characters like Sidney and Gale, I see a really well done attempt to change those tropes by showing strong women who survived the worst circumstances purely because they had the will to do so. As a creative, I admire Wes Craven as a director, and his effect on cinema cannot be overstated. It's a shame that he isn't around anymore. He's a reminder of how temporary we all really are. But when I look at Scream, it reminds me that we can make our mark by embracing the things that we love. And by doing so, we can change. Thanks for watching.